When you walk away from a narcissistic dynamic, something powerful happens that is rarely talked about. You are told to focus on healing, to move on, to stop wondering whether they ever cared or whether they feel the loss. But the truth is, your departure creates a rupture they cannot easily dismiss. Narcissistic relationships are built on control, validation, and access to your emotional energy. When that access is removed, it destabilizes the entire structure they relied on to feel significant. Your leaving is not just a breakup or an ending, it is a mirror held up to everything they avoided seeing. The person they once controlled, doubted, or diminished is no longer available to play that role. And that absence forces a reckoning. Not the kind that leads to accountability or apology, but the kind that lives quietly inside them as irritation, obsession, and unresolved loss. They may deny it, rationalize it, or try to replace you quickly, but the disruption remains. This is where your power truly lies, not in proving anything to them, but in understanding what your absence represents. You are not interchangeable. You are a source of regulation, identity, and emotional supply. Losing you means losing a sense of control they believed was permanent. And while they may never say the words, their behavior tells the story. Your growth, your peace, and your refusal to return become the most undeniable evidence that they feel the loss far more deeply than they ever expected. When you choose silence after walking away from a narcissistic dynamic, it is not passive and it is not weakness. It is one of the most powerful boundaries you will ever set. Silence removes the fuel that once kept the cycle alive. No explanations, no emotional reactions, no attempts to be understood, and that absence of response is deeply unsettling to someone who relied on your engagement to feel in control. Your silence is not empty, it is full of meaning, and it lands harder than any confrontation ever could. In your life, silence marks the moment you stopped participating in your own erosion. Where you once tried to fix, explain, defend, or soothe, you now choose self-preservation. This shift changes the entire power dynamic. Narcissistic individuals are oriented toward reaction. They measure their relevance through emotional impact. When your voice goes quiet, they lose the feedback loop that confirmed their influence over you. That loss creates confusion, frustration, and an urgent need to reassert control. What makes your silence such a wake-up call is that it signals finality without drama. You are no longer trying to prove your worth or correct the narrative. You are no longer asking for recognition or accountability. This forces them to confront something they work hard to avoid, the reality that you are no longer available to be shaped, diminished, or pulled back into the cycle. Your silence tells them you see the pattern clearly now, and that awareness cannot be manipulated away. In many cases, this is when their behavior escalates. They may attempt hoovering, provoke reactions, or rewrite history to regain access to your attention. But even these attempts are proof of impact. Silence denies them the reassurance that they still matter in the way they once did. It exposes a vulnerability beneath the grandiosity, an unsettling realization that they have lost influence over someone who once centered them. For you, silence becomes a turning point of clarity. Without the constant noise of their demands and distortions, your nervous system begins to settle. You start to hear your own thoughts again. You reconnect with your values, your intuition, and your sense of self. Silence creates space for healing, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience of peace returning to your body and mind. This is why silence resonates so deeply. It is not meant to punish them, yet it becomes instructive. It teaches them that access to you was never guaranteed. It shows them that control has limits. And most importantly, it teaches you that your worth does not require an audience, validation, or explanation, only the courage to step away and remain grounded in your truth. When you leave a narcissistic dynamic, the space you once occupied does not quietly close behind you. It echoes. Your absence becomes a presence of its own, one that reveals what had been carefully concealed. In your life, you may have believed you were replaceable, that anyone could step into your role, but what you actually provided went far beyond companionship. You offered emotional regulation, validation, stability, and meaning. When that disappears, it exposes a hollow center they had relied on you to fill. Narcissistic structures are built around avoidance of shame, emptiness, and unresolved wounds that were never addressed. Your presence functioned as a buffer against these internal experiences. You absorbed emotional chaos, soothed insecurities, and helped maintain an illusion of control and importance. When you are gone, there is no longer a shield between them and what they have spent a lifetime running from. The emptiness surfaces, and it is deeply uncomfortable. This is not emptiness in the poetic sense. It is a chronic lack of internal grounding, a fragile sense of self that depends on external reinforcement. Without you, distractions lose their effectiveness. New attention does not land the same way. Validation becomes fleeting and unsatisfying. They may attempt to fill the void with status, admiration, or new relationships, but the relief never lasts. Your absence has created a contrast that cannot be undone. They now know what it feels like to lose a stabilizing force, even if they refuse to name it. In your life, recognizing this shift is empowering. It reframes the narrative that you were the problem or that you were too much. In truth, you were essential in ways that were never acknowledged. Your emotional labor mattered. Your consistency mattered. Your capacity to care mattered. The emptiness they face is not caused by you leaving, it is revealed by it. You simply stopped compensating for something that was never yours to fix. Your absence also restores something vital to you. The energy you once spent holding things together returns home. You begin to feel fuller, clearer, more rooted in yourself. Where they experience loss and disorientation, you experience integration. This contrast is not about superiority, it is about alignment. You chose truth over illusion, growth over containment, and self-respect over self-abandonment. This is why your absence is so confronting for them. It removes the external scaffolding they depended on while allowing you to build an internal foundation that no one can take from you. They are left with what they avoided. You are left with yourself, whole, grounded, and no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. When you begin to heal after a narcissistic relationship, something quietly radical takes place. Your healing was never part of their plan. The dynamic depended on you staying confused, depleted, and emotionally tethered. Healing disrupts that arrangement completely. It shifts you out of survival mode and into self-awareness. And that change is deeply unsettling to someone who relied on your pain to feel powerful. Your growth becomes the very thing they never anticipated and never prepared for in your life. Healing looks like clarity replacing chaos. You stop questioning your reality and start trusting your perceptions. You recognize patterns instead of personalizing blame. This internal shift is not loud or performative, but it is unmistakable. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer chasing closure or validation, and this absence of need is where regret begins to surface on their side. Not regret rooted in empathy or accountability, but regret rooted in loss of access and influence. Narcissistic regret is complex. It is not about missing you as a whole person. It is about realizing too late that the version of you who tolerated distortion, dismissal, and emotional imbalance no longer exists. Your healing signals permanence. It tells them you have moved beyond the reach of manipulation. The strategies that once worked now fall flat, and that realization can be destabilizing. They may attempt to reconnect, provoke, or undermine your progress, not because they have changed, but because your healing exposes what they can no longer control. What makes this regret so unexpected is that it contradicts their internal narrative. They believed you would remain available, emotionally affected, or easily replaced. Your healing proves otherwise. It highlights the cost of their behavior without you ever needing to point it out. Your calm becomes evidence, your boundaries become proof, your indifference becomes the message they cannot argue with. For you, healing is not about winning or proving your value, it is about reclaiming it. You begin to invest your energy in yourself rather than managing someone else's emotional landscape. You develop self-compassion where there was once self-doubt. You experience peace where there was once hypervigilance. This transformation is deeply validating, not because of how it affects them, but because of how it restores you. And yet, it is this very restoration that triggers their regret. Your healing removes the illusion that they were indispensable. It reveals that the connection thrived only as long as you were willing to abandon yourself. Now that you are whole, grounded, and no longer seeking their approval, the loss becomes undeniable. You moved forward. They stayed stuck. And that contrast is the consequence they never expected to face. When you rise without them, it delivers a message no explanation ever could. Your growth becomes visible in ways that cannot be dismissed or rewritten. You are calmer, clearer, more self-directed. You are no longer orbiting their needs or adjusting yourself to preserve the connection. In your life, this shift marks the moment you reclaimed authorship of your story. And for someone who once defined themselves through control, watching you thrive independently is the ultimate confirmation of loss. Narcissistic dynamics depend on the belief that you need them to function, to succeed, to feel whole. When you rise on your own, that belief collapses. Your progress exposes the truth that your strength was never borrowed. It was always yours. The achievements, confidence, and peace you cultivate after leaving highlight how much of your potential was constrained within the relationship. This realization can be deeply unsettling for someone who depended on being central to your sense of worth. In your life, rising does not necessarily mean external success alone. It can show up as emotional stability, healthier relationships, or a renewed connection to yourself. You respond instead of react. You choose boundaries without guilt. You trust your intuition again. These internal shifts are profound because they signal freedom from the psychological hooks that once kept you entangled. And even from a distance, this transformation is felt. It is seen in your energy, your choices, and your refusal to re-enter old patterns. For them, witnessing this rise confronts a painful contradiction. They may have minimized you, doubted you, or claimed you would fail without them. Your reality proves otherwise. It reveals that their presence was not a catalyst for your growth, but an obstacle to it. This does not lead to healthy reflection or accountability, but it does lead to regret rooted in comparison. They are forced to face the contrast between your forward movement and their internal stagnation. What makes this proof of loss so powerful is that it requires nothing from you. You are not explaining, defending, or seeking recognition. You are simply living in alignment. Your life expands while their narrative shrinks. You become evidence that healing is possible, that clarity is attainable, and that life after them can be fuller than life with them. This realization can be deeply destabilizing for someone who believed they were irreplaceable. For you, rising is not about showing them what they lost. It is about honoring what you found. You found yourself again. You found agency, dignity, and peace. You learned that your value does not depend on being chosen, understood, or validated by someone incapable of mutuality. And as you continue to grow, their absence becomes irrelevant to your sense of self, even as your presence lingers in their awareness as a reminder of what they can no longer reach. The truth is, the deepest proof of their loss was never meant to be a lesson for them. It was meant to be a liberat. Ion for you. Every step you took away from confusion and toward clarity reshaped your life in ways that no one can take back. You no longer measure your worth by someone else's ability to recognize it. You no longer wait to be chosen, validated, or understood. You chose yourself, and that decision changed everything. What they feel now is not your responsibility. Regret, discomfort, and emptiness are consequences of patterns you did not create and were never meant to heal. Your role was never to save them. Your role was to survive, awaken, and return to yourself. And you did. That is the quiet victory that speaks louder than confrontation ever could. As you move forward, remember that healing is not about proving loss, but about living free of it. You are no longer defined by what you endured, but by what you reclaimed. Peace became your power, boundaries became your language, and self-respect became your foundation. Let that be enough. Because the moment you stopped looking back was the moment your life began to move forward. And in that forward motion, you didn't just leave them behind, you finally came home to yourself.